So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Allahumma salli wa sallim ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. We begin in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we send peace and blessings upon his noble messenger Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and upon his family and all of his companions and his wives and those who follow all of them until the day of judgment. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Allahumma make us from amongst those people. So, last week, I spoke about the two ideas of khawf and raja. Fear, khawf, and raja, hope, and the difference between healthy fear and fear that causes despair, the difference between those two types of fear, and the two types of hope, which are the realistic hope that we should always have and the unrealistic hope. And that those two things, we have to make sure to monitor them. And those two elements of fear and hope, khawf and raja, keep us balanced. So if we ever feel too much fear, and it's like if we have enough fear to keep us away, say the stovetop. If we have too much fear of the fire, we won't be able to cook. But we have enough fear of the fire to say, okay, I'm going to be able to cook and utilize this thing, but without harming myself. So we have enough fear of it. So we have enough fear of the eternal fire of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to keep us on the straight and narrow, but we don't want to have so much fear that it actually causes us to be in a state of despair, hopelessness, and go into that state. In the same way, we have to balance out hope. And I felt it's important for us to know those two concepts to add to the idea of how we're going to change ourselves. And the week before that, I talked about as an example of something that we can change, and hopefully we're all working on during this isolation and the stay-at-home time, which is making the connection. So even though we are disconnected physically from people, through the blessings of the internet and telecommunications, phones, and so forth, we can work to reach out to more people, family, friends, and so forth. And that was an example of something that we can do to change our behaviors. The week before that, I spoke about the 6 M's of change: the musharata, the musharata, the mujahada, the muraqaba, and so forth. You can reference the earlier talk about that. What I wanted to speak about today is an example that's mentioned in the Quran, that Allah mentions, and it's been on my mind, especially as we're in this period of Corona and dealing with it, and really as the world and as humanity, and we're seeing how people are dealing with it. But before I jump into that, if anybody has any questions, go ahead and post them in the chat, and I can also I can speak to some of those questions rather than leaving to the questions to the end. So you can go ahead and put the questions in, and I will try to either bring that topic into what I'm speaking about, or just go ahead and answer it at the end or during the chat. So one thing that's coming to mind, and especially it's brought forth by some of the news today, is there's a story in the Quran, or an example that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions as an idea of how people call out to him. And this is really a time where we should be calling out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, calling out for his mercy, for his rahmah, turning to him, recognizing his magnificence, his greatness, his mightiness in what he's able to do. Because if this situation is not humbling us, by look at how it's just bringing entire nations to stop. Even a lot of the frivolous chatter in the news and fights in the news, if you notice, everybody's like, okay, we don't have to have all of these petty squabbles and these petty arguments. Let's focus on saving ourselves, saving our lives, saving our health, saving our economy, saving our humanity. Let's focus on this. So as we're watching this, there's still a lot of things that are difficult, and for the naysayers, for the people who think that the coronavirus and everything is really just an overblown issue, that people are taking it out of context, or they're my response to them is, I've been through we've all been through flu seasons. Every year flu season comes around. But this is a situation where I know multiple people who have gotten sick, who are sick right now. I know people who have actually passed away because of this, because of coronavirus. I've spoken just today. I spoke with an imam, or the son of his father is an imam in New York City, and he said if their masjid, with it's just one masjid, and there's 150 or more masajid in New York City, just one masjid. Just yesterday, they had 9 janazas, 9 funeral prayers for people who had passed away from the coronavirus. So it's not something that our community has seen before. Humanity, or the Muslim community, we haven't seen this. People don't pass away from flu, even if there's underlying situations, as much as what we're seeing here. Just today, I got the news that one of my students and a good friend, who he's in prison, and I started teaching him through my work in outreach and teaching Muslims who were prisoners. He became Muslim in prison, and mashallah, he's he's excelled in his studies. But I got word today that he's in the prison hospital today with the coronavirus, and we're really just waiting for the news to make sure that he's okay. So we've never experienced this before. We're still in the storm. We're still in the storm of corona, and we don't know how long the storm's going to be. But it is a storm for all intents and purposes. It's a storm. We know eventually it'll be over. But while we're weathering the storm, while we're on the ship, while we're trying to get through it, we have to say, what is our mindset while we're here in the middle of the storm, during this storm, and what do we do afterwards? Well, if we look in the Quran, there's this example that Allah uses, which is of when people are on a ship and they are out on a journey and they get caught in a storm. Now we don't travel by ships like they used to. I mean, the transatlantic coming from Europe to the US was a very, very difficult journey. Traveling by ship was really hard. To give you an idea, I mean, if you ever go to a museum or maybe watch a documentary about what those journeys entailed, when they set sail, they had to keep their rations with them, and that included fresh water, because there's no fresh water for them on their journey. So you have your rations of fresh water, you have your rations of food, you have limited space, and you have to make this journey, and you don't know if the rations will run out, if the winds won't take you where you need to go, if a storm will come and take you off course, whatever, if a sickness breaks out on the ship. I mean, there was a lot of things that could happen. And this journey from Europe to the US is months. It's like 2 to 3 months of what they would take. And keeping this in mind of the difficulty of journey by ship, think about how people used to get to Mecca for Hajj. If it wasn't by land, it was by ship, by sea. And those journeys were really, really difficult. Sometimes it would take months or years to make the entire journey. One, my teacher, and the teacher of many of my teachers as well, Murabat al-Hajj, he made the journey from Mauritania in West Africa all the way to Mecca, as across the Saharan Desert, across the African continent. He walked to Hajj, performed the Hajj, and came back. And the entire journey took him 3 years. 3 years going over land. The other way that people would go is up to Morocco and go by sea, go to Egypt, cross. This was before the Suez Canal. Go down by ship on the Red Sea. It was a very, very difficult journey. So just put yourself in the mindset of somebody who's going to get on a ship. You're off of land, and how the ship is creaking, and you don't know if there's going to be a hole in the ship, if the rations are going to run out, and you're on this ship for 2 or 3 months. And if there's families, you have people who with children, you have people who might have children while on the journey. You have give birth on the journey. You might have people who pass away. I mean, it's a little community on the ship. So now imagine what happens when you're on that ship and a storm hits, and now those waves are really tossing and turning the ship. What does the person do? they turn to God. They turn to Allah and they say, Ya Allah, get us out of this storm. Take us out of this storm. Deliver us from this storm. And you may have experienced this, maybe not on a ship, but on on an airplane. Once the turbulence, sometimes light turbulence, people will keep going. They'll keep watching their show. They'll keep reading their book. They'll keep sleeping, whatever it is. They'll keep their conversation going. But if the turbulence gets really bad, that's when you see everybody kind of just like start looking around and they're getting nervous. Maybe some people start praying. And it's at that point of realization when the human beings realize I'm not in control. And something very powerful is happening here. The winds and the turbulence for the airplane, the sea and the wind for the ship in the ocean. Something more powerful than me could sink me or could bring this plane down. So if something more powerful than me is doing this, I need something more powerful than that. I need the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who controls everything. I need him to deliver me from this storm. So think about the state of mind. And if you've ever been in a situation like this, think about the state of mind of that dua when you turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And one of the scholars of West Africa, Sheikh Muhammad Maulud, he has a wonderful series of adab, of how to teach us, how to inculcate in us, how to get us to really have this concept of adab, which is not just etiquettes. Adab is really an encompassing, a holistic way of dealing with others, dealing with the way we turn to Allah. So he has this series of adab of the tongue, the maharam al-lisan, the adab of the heart, how to purify our hearts, adab with our parents, adab with the masjid, adab with the sadaqah, adab teaching, and so many of these courses on adab. And I've translated a few of these, and some of the courses are available online. And on the purification of the heart, in the section of dua, he talks about the importance of turning in prayer, in supplication, in dua to Allah. And he says, the mindset that you should have is like a person who is drowning in the sea. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect all of us, protect you, protect me, protect all of us from ever being in that situation. But imagine somebody who's drowning in the sea. Or he said, lost in a jungle or lost in a forest. And now that person, think of the state of that person when they turn to Allah. He says, that's how you should be when you're making dua to Allah. It's the dua of the muttar, the dua of the one in deep need. It's not just like, oh, assalamu alaikum, you finish your prayer, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and you turn your hands, you're like, oh Allah, give me this, ameen ya rabbil alameen, and go off on that's good to maintain the habit of dua, but we should really make dua an experience where we turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We recognize no power, we have no ability. And the place that really happens is in the sea, when a person is drowning, or the ship is experiencing in the storm, or when you're just lost. I mean, I think to myself one time, there was a place out here in California, in the Bay Area, for anybody in the Bay Area, and I think most people on the video here are from the Bay Area. It's in Sano. They call it Little Yosemite because it looks kind of Yosemite. And I remember one time I went there in high school with some friends of mine, and we went to a place where they had some rocks, and we said, big, huge boulders. And we said, let's climb up them. Instead of doing the trail around them, let's just go ahead and climb up them. And I remember climbing, and of course, we're not prepared for climbing that day. We're just hiking, and we're having a good time. But we see these boulders. We said, hey, this is a bit of let's give ourselves a challenge. Let me go ahead and do this. So I remember climbing up, and you're trying to find a place for your foot as you're going up this boulder, finding a place for your hand. And I got to this place on the face of the boulder where I felt I had the realization I can't go up and I can't go down. I don't have something I can't see where I can put my foot going down, and I don't have something where I can go up. And at that point, I really realized, oh, I am not in control. Ya Allah, help me out. And then I've found something to hang on to, and I can't remember exactly if I kept going up or went back down, but it was an experience, that feeling of complete helplessness. I was not able to help myself. And now we can't replicate that in our lives, but you can, when you have those experiences, you can kind of capture it. You can think, okay, I had this experience, I captured it, I remember what my feeling is. And now fast forward years later or months later, when you turn to dua, you should kind of maybe think of that time and think of that place where you were, what you were experiencing, so forth. Put yourself in that state of mind and really start to visualize and realize the fact that we're not in control. Even in a time where we're not stuck on the boulder, we're not in the airplane during turbulence, we're not in the sea, just in our day-to-day life. How many times is our heart beating? How many times is our lungs are working? Our circulatory system, our blood system is working. Our eyes, our hearing, everything, digestion, everything is working, but we're not in control. And if we realize how weak we are and susceptible we are to having those things change, we can realize we're always in that state. We should always realize that we're in a state of complete need of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so when we do that, once we realize that, that's when the dua is that much more powerful. So again, just because a person is not able to capture that and get into that state doesn't mean that they leave dua. We should always stay in the habits. It's just like prayer. Even though the optimum state for us in prayer is to be present, to be focused, to be thinking about the prayer, not think about what we need to do or what we've done or what we want to do or all of those things. We're supposed to be focused in the prayer. But we shouldn't say, well, I'm not focused in the prayer, so let me just leave the prayer completely. And there are people who get to that. They say, I would rather, just leave the prayer than pray without focus. No, that's not the sunnah. That's not the tradition. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught us to do actions and to do them regularly, especially the obligations, the fara'id, and then work on refining the action itself. So the image of the ship that's mentioned in the Quran, you can imagine the people are on the ship. They have that need. There's many stories that you can hear of people who have turned to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala during that. One of the most famous stories is, and you can look this up online, of Yusuf Islam, who was formerly known as Cat Stevens. And his way of how he became Muslim, and he was in an ocean. He was in, I believe, here in California. He wasn't very far out in the ocean, but he was at a point where he was almost drowning, and he made dua to Allah. This was before he was Muslim. Before he was Muslim, he made dua to Allah to save him, and then he would serve him. And that's what began his journey of looking into various religions and then eventually coming to Islam. So look up that story, and that's actually something. It's a very famous story. It's something you can tell other people, but it shows you the power of dua when a person is really in need. And okay, so now we can't replicate those situations. We can't create situations where we're really in need. But we can try to remember them. We can try to remember a time where you were really felt that you were in need. Right now, we're really in need. We want this virus to be done with. We want our lives to go back to the way they were. We're in a state of need. When people are going through an illness or they have a family member who's going through an illness, if people have lost their job or they're afraid of losing their job, or whenever we're in a state of real need, that's when we turn to dua. And it's a powerful spiritual experience for us to do. And then especially when we see the change happen, when we see our dua answered. So it's a way for us to connect with Allah. It's a way for us to really be present in the moment. So we can't recreate those situations, but what do we do? What do we do in those other times where we don't have that extreme need? Well, going back to the story that's mentioned in the Quran, Allah says that there are people who, when they're out on the ship, when they're out on the sea, and you remember though that imagery that I was sharing, and think about that. You're out, you're disconnected, and they pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, please, if you save us from this storm, if you save us from this storm, we will believe in you, we will serve you, we will do good deeds, we will, they mention all those things, and it's almost like a bargain. I remember one time speaking with one of my uncles. On my father's side of the family, they're from Jordan. My mother's side of the family, they're from Mississippi, and they're from Vicksburg, Mississippi, which it's got a lot of history, and it's right on the Mississippi River. So we had gone out one summer when we were down there. I went out with one of my uncles. We went fishing on the Mississippi River, and in a conversation with another one of my uncles one time, I said, do you ever go fishing out there on the river? Because he'll go fishing in other parts. There's a lot of great fishing in Mississippi, and hunting. Fishing and hunting it's really amazing down there. So he said, no, he never goes out on the river. I said, why not? He said, well, I'll tell you. And they're not Muslim, they're Catholic, but they had picked up a few Arabic words here and there from meeting my father. Also my grandfather, my mother's father, he went to Jordan a number of times, so he picked up a few Arabic words here and there, and he brought them back into their households, their vocab, or the words that they were using sometimes. So he said, boy, I made a promise to Allah, meaning where it's a few hundred feet down, and there's these, I don't know the exact term for it, but it's like a water cyclone that's in the river. And sometimes if people get stuck in there, they could drown, and they get pulled to the bottom of the river. And it's a few hundred feet down at some places, very deep. And that's it. There's no chance of saving them. It's a very powerful, I don't know the proper term for it. But he was out there, and there was some waves, there was some of this, something, and he was in a small boat, and he wanted to get off the river. And he said, God, if you get me off this river, safely, I will never get on this river again. And so he said he was in a point where he was muttar. He was in a serious need. He got off the river, and he said, I never went back. He said, that was a promise that I made to God, that I would do that. Cat Stevens, in his story, he not only did he make dua and say, oh Allah, save me, he said, save me. If you save me, I will do this. And that's actually something that you can add into the dua. But you have to remember that if we do that portion of, because we could just say, Ya Allah, save me. Oh Allah, save me. But if somebody says, Ya Allah, save me, and if you save me, I will do such and such, that's called a nether, a promise. When you promise to do something for the sake of Allah, we have to stand by those oaths that we do. And there's a whole set of traditions and etiquette and rules from the Sunnah and from the Quran that we can learn about nether. But without going into all of those details here, the point is that when people do that, you have to be conscious of the fact that you want to stand by your promises. So that always intrigued me, that here was a person who he made his dua, and he made a nether, and he got off, and he never went back to that. So the people in the Quran, the stories mentioned about them, or the method is mentioned, that they're on the ship, they're really in need, they're making dua, and they say, Ya Allah, if you save us, we will believe in you, and so forth. But then what happens? What happens when they get to the shore? When they get to the shore, they forget Allah. And that's what Allah is telling us. Don't be like the people who are caught in the storm. You're on the ship. You feel that helplessness. You turn to Allah. You make that dua, whether or not you make a promise, but you turn to Allah. Then when you get out of the storm, we forget Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's the nature of human beings. So when we struggle against that, we're struggling against our humanity. Human beings are called insan. And there's a difference of opinion on where the root words, insan in Arabic, what the root word of insan comes from. Some said it comes from nesiya, to forget. And one of the early scholars from amongst the Sahaba said that human beings were called insan likathrati nisyanihi, because of how much we forget. Our nature is to forget, not just worldly things, but even other worldly things. Like, we're on the ship, I think everybody can remember a time when they were on that ship, metaphorically speaking, and they made dua to Allah. They were saved, but then we forget. Then we fall back into our habits, our bad habits, maybe. We forget to do our good deeds because we forget those things. We forget that state that we were in. So it's really a struggle against our own human nature to remember. To remember. And the Quran is always reminding us to remember. And what is dhikr, what is remembrance in the Quran called? Dhikr. And one of the names of the Quran is a dhikr, which means a reminder and to remember. So we have, that's part of our Islam, part of our humanity is to work on remembering. For all human beings, there was a time before our souls were brought into this world. The souls were created. And Allah says in the Quran that He spoke out to all of the souls. Alastu bi rabbikum. Am I not your Lord? And every single human being, every soul, everybody who's ever lived, everybody who's living now, everybody who will live in the future until the day of judgment, every human being who has a soul, their souls were there at that time. It's called the mithaq, the oath giving. We were all there, every single one of us. And when Allah spoke to us and said, Alastu bi rabbikum, am I not your Lord? We all responded by saying, Bala, yes, indeed you are. So we all affirmed that. Every soul that Allah created affirmed that we recognize that He is our Lord and creator and cherisher and sustainer, and He is the one worthy and deserving of our worship. But now in the dunya, some people remember that and they are believers, they're the Muslims, and some people forget that. They forget that initial mithaq. Now, we might not necessarily remember exactly that happening, but we act upon that action. By us believing and acting upon that, we are affirming that oath that we made before we even came in, before we came into our current state of being. So human beings forget. We'll get off the ship, we'll get to land, we'll get to safety, and we'll forget. So what I've been thinking about, especially during this time of Corona and the isolation and the fear of, you go out shopping and you're fear. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of thought that we have. We have people, if we know of people who have Corona, we're afraid, making dua that Allah saves them. And then there's people who don't have it, and such as the healthcare workers. I got a message from a dear member in the community, and he said, please make dua because a number of my family members are healthcare professionals and we're afraid for them. They have to do their job. And we've already heard some of the stories of people who are healthcare providers and they got the coronavirus and they passed away. Most have been able to survive, but some have passed away. Rahmatullahi alayhim. May Allah have mercy upon them. And we consider that they're shuhada, that they're martyrs in this situation. But it is hard, and we're making dua that Allah protects the people who have not gotten it. What I told a person who had called me up yesterday or sent me a message asking for dua, I said, I'll definitely, of course, I'll make dua for you. But I want to remind you that all of your good actions, everything that you've done, and you and your family of doing good for humanity, doing good for da'wah, and for calling people to Islam, and for showing others the beauty of Islam, and for serving the Muslim ummah and for serving humanity at large. All of those good things, I truly believe they're going to be protective factors on the spiritual realm. We're not going to just say there's spiritual factors, and so we're not going to take these physical precautions. No, we take the physical precautions, but we also know there's a spiritual element. There's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can protect us from things that might have otherwise harmed us, even if we don't take those physical precautions. But we take the physical precautions and we depend on Allah, and part of the precautions that we take are spiritual precautions. And that's not just at this time, that's also previously, doing good actions and good deeds. If you look back at the story of the beginning of Revelation, when the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he came down from the mountain, and he didn't know exactly what had happened, who this messenger was, who was Jibril, the angel Jibril alayhi salam, telling him what he told him in the beginning of Revelation. And he came to his wife, his beloved wife, Sayyidatuna Khadija, Lady Khadija radiallahu anha, his wife, and she told him, when he was afraid that that this might be some, that it's something harmful to him, he said, no, 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 it's not a jinn, or it's not magic, or it's not any of these other things, because you are a good man. You have done good things. You help those in need. So she was reminding him that your good deeds that you've always done and that you've been known for, those are a protective factor for you. So that's what I reminded this community member, and I remind myself that we have to really focus on good actions and good deeds throughout our life, in addition to a dua as a spiritual precaution. So now, if we get through the storm, and inshallah we get through the storm, where we all have our hands up, we're making dua, we're turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, now we get to shore. The question is, and this is what I'm asking myself, and this is what I feel we all should be asking ourselves, once we get to the shore, what are we going to take out of this experience? What are we going to remember? Is it going to increase us in good actions? Is it going to increase us in faith? Is it going to increase us in some of the good deeds that we've started, or that we've thought about? Oh, I want to change this and I want to change that. Are we going to, if we make a promise, Ya Allah, if you get me out of this, if you get me and my family members and my loved ones and my friends and my coworkers and my colleagues, if you get us out of this, I will do such and such. And it might be simple as, I will build a well for some people. I will help take care of an orphan. I will build a masjid. I will give a little bit of sadaqah. And remember, it could just be a couple of dollars. Sadaqah is not measured in how much you give. It's in the intentions that you give and the sincerity that you put with it. So whatever it is, if we make those promises, if we make that dua when we get to shore, are we going to remember the experience? There's something, as a kid, I used to hear this term, and we used to find it humorous, which was my happy place. I'm in my happy place. And I thought it was, something that joke, that people just joked about there. I'm thinking about my happy place. But then as I read more about, therapeutic methods, and I'm not a psychologist and I'm not a clinician, but I read some books, and I have spoken with a number of people about this, and especially in terms of developing the programs that we're doing, especially in the prisons and the prison work that we do, self-help and therapy and therapeutic practices and so forth. But one of the therapeutic practices is to when you're in a good place, so not in the storm necessarily, but if you're ever in a good place, like if you just think back to maybe when all of your family were gathered for an event. Maybe everybody came in for Eid together, or you all met up at a cabin somewhere, or you got an Airbnb somewhere, and all the family was a mini family reunion or an extended family reunion. And those instances during that, when everybody sits around and tells stories, and that good feeling that you have. Or maybe you went out hiking, or you went out on a trip, and you saw a beautiful sunset or a beautiful sunrise, or an amazing view of the mountains, or an amazing view of the sky, whatever it was. Everybody has those moments in their life where you're just, at that moment, you're in awe. You're like, subhanallah, this, you can just feel that experience. Everything else kind of melts away, and you're really, really in the moment. Well, those are your happy places. Those are the times where you feel this surur, you feel this sa'ada, you feel this happiness, and you want to capture that moment. And so the idea of the happy place is you want to capture that moment, so that in other times where you're going through difficulties, you want to be able to close your eyes and just reflect on that and think back to that good place, and it'll help calm you down. Just last night, I watched this movie, and I highly recommend it. It's called Just Mercy. And it's based on a true story of a man who was wrongly convicted, an innocent man who sat on death row in Alabama for about 6 years or so. and it tells a story of how he was, um, his wrongful conviction and how it was overturned, and it's a really an amazing story. Sad, but it's really important for us to know, especially if you want to understand an element of the prison industrial complex and of the criminal system here and the so-called justice system, and how they said out of every 9 people executed, it's been proven that 1 is innocent. So imagine that. Like, that's not good statistics for our nation to have. In any case, the point is that at one point in the movie, he was in a forest, and I don't want to give all the spoilers, but he was in the forest. He's a logger. He had a small lumber business, and he just looks up at the sky, and he can see where the sky has opened up because of this pine tree. Looks at the sky, breathes in the air, he took in that moment. Well, years later, and I don't know if this is actually truly happened to him or if this was just dramatization, but this occurs with people. But in the movie, he when he was in times where it was really difficult for him to be on death row, he thought back to that place. So it's a very powerful it's a very powerful tool, and it's not something that's foreign to our tradition of Islam, because if you see in the Quran, Allah is constantly reminding the believers, and even reminding the believers about states that they used to be in. Remember when you were a weak people. Remember when I gave you victory at Badr. Remember when such and such happened at Uhud. Like, remember the victory. I mean, imagine the feelings that they had when they had the victory at Badr. Remember Badr? Imagine the feelings when the Muslims deserted or were being attacked at Uhud, and they were being massacred. Allah reminds them of Hunayn, remind them of before they were Muslim and how Allah saved them. So he's reminding us of these good times and also of the bad times. Remember that? And so that's what we have to think about in our lives. We have to think about the good times and the bad times, and we don't want to forget. And our nature is to forget, is to constantly be in this state of forgetfulness. So we have to be in this constant state of remembrance, not only remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but also remembering our states. So that state, when we were on that ship in the storm, and the feelings that we had, and the du'as that we made, and the promises that we made, and that being in that moment, we want to remember that throughout our life. So that regular life, and our regular routines, we have to be careful with that. Even if things are lifted, we should really consider things. Even though, I don't foresee the masajid being open just out of precaution, but we should really take our precautions. Even if legal requirements of shelter in place are removed, we should also just err on the side of caution and be careful, and not feel that we're losing the sunnah of praying in the masjid because we're gaining the sunnah of praying tarawih in the homes. We have to remember the Prophet ﷺ prayed tarawih in his home. So that's also a sunnah. Yes, the Sahaba prayed in the masjid. So they're both acceptable sunnahs. So we're gaining the sunnah of being able to pray at the home. So we want to be careful. But at the same time, now people are talking about, it's almost like we can see the edge of the storm, and we can see land, and we're going to get there. But we just want to be careful that we don't go through this experience and come out of this experience without being closer to our Lord, without being closer to Allah, without being better Muslims, and better to our fellows and our families. So with that, I will open up for questions. Use the last few minutes for questions, if anybody has any. Now, while I'm waiting for the questions, I will say that the same thing that we could do to recognize the happy place, one of the tools that the therapists and counselors mention is that it's not necessarily something that just happens. Like you could tap into a memory that you have, but it's also good to when you're in that situation, when you're in that really happy moment, to take a few moments and take the moment in and think about everything. So if you're sitting on, say you're on you're in the middle of a lake on a boat or on a raft or whatever it might be, and you can see the shoreline and you can hear the quietness. Maybe you hear the waves. So you want to take all of that in. You want to look at the sky. You want to think about how that sun is on your body. You want to think about the breeze, the smell of the breeze, the sound of the trees, all of that. You want to take all of that in and capture it. It's better capturing than a camera, than a video. Everybody wants to, when they see a cool thing, like, oh, let me take out my phone and take the no. That's good. Have some of those moments captured on your phones, but really capture the moment, just taking everything in, the feeling of the air and the sun on your face, or if it's at nighttime, the air and the looking at the moonlight, whatever it might be, the stars. Really take that in and capture the moment. And then you can draw back into that during those times of need. And at the same time, like now, take some time to just capture the moment. Think about, what are we going through? How are you feeling during this time? What is the situation? What are people that what are the struggles and the fears that are and anxieties that they have, that they're going through? Just kind of have that realization, because it's like we're on the ship and we want to just, at one point, even though we're making sure we're safe, at one point we just want to look around and say, oh, I'm on a ship that's creaking really loudly. The sails are, sounds like they might break. There's water coming over the side. And then that way, when we get onto the shore, if we ever feel ourselves veering off track and forgetting, then we can take a moment and say, remember the ship? Remember when we were in the storm? Yeah, get back on track. So the same thing. Remember the Corona period, because this is going to become just a little check on the timeline of our history as humans and as individuals. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us, protect you, protect your families, get us through this storm in the best of fashions. Ya Allah, keep us safe, keep our loved ones safe, keep our families safe, keep humanity safe. For those who are sick, Ya Allah, give them shifa, give them a healing. For those who have passed away or who will pass away, Ya Allah, make their graves gardens of paradise, and give their families patience and ease in dealing with this. Ya Arhamar Rahimin. Allahumma najjina min al-karb al-azim. Allahumma, oh Allah, get us out of this storm and get us out of this storm safely. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Okay, so we'll see everyone next week, inshallah, for the final installment of this series. And then we will possibly change for Ramadan. But just stay tuned to the announcements. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.